Right now, the last men who can dig a qanat by hand are dying of old age, and when they go, 3,000 years of desert survival goes with them. We tell ourselves these were primitive tricks, mud huts, superstition, hard lives. We are wrong. These were technologies so advanced that modern engineers are quietly copying them to survive a warming planet. And almost nobody under 70 can still do a single one of them. Here are 25. Number 25. Sarouj, the mortar that should not work. To build in a desert that swings from freezing nights to 104 degrees, Persian builders needed a cement that was waterproof and heatproof at once. Their recipe reads like a spell: sand, clay, lime, ash, goat hair, and egg whites, whipped together in exact proportions. The egg white proteins sealed it against water. The goat hair stopped it from cracking. Structures sealed with sarouj are still standing after 500 years, and materials scientists who analyze it admit it rivals modern synthetic sealants. The masters mixed it by feel, reading the paste with their hands. Almost none of them are left, and the exact proportions were never written down. Number 24. Building a city out of dirt. On the treeless Iranian plateau, wood was almost worthless, so an entire civilization learned to build from mud. They layered wet earth into walls called qanat, and molded sun-dried bricks called kesht, sometimes mixing in straw or manure to double the strength. Done right, a mud wall holds a steady temperature while the desert bakes and freezes outside. The proof still stands at the Argi Bam, the largest adobe structure on Earth, first raised under the Achaemenids more than 2,000 years ago. When a 2003 earthquake flattened much of it, restorers hit the hardest problem of all. Almost nobody alive still knew how the old masters had mixed and stacked it. Number 23. Raising a dome with no wood at all. Everywhere else on Earth, builders needed a timber frame to hold a dome up while it was built. The Persians refused. On a plain with no timber to spare, master masons learned to lay a brick dome course by course, each ring leaning on the last, holding itself up in midair with nothing beneath it but a rope, a plumb line, and the builder's eye. This is how the great cisterns, bathhouses, and caravanserais were roofed. In the village of Esfahak, in South Khorasan, an earthquake in 1978 nearly erased the technique, and young villagers had to sit at the feet of the last old masters to learn it again before they died. Number 22. Mining the Stone of Victory. 53 kilometers from Neyshabur sits the oldest turquoise mine on Earth, worked for 7,000 years. The Persians called the gem Piruze, victory, and prized its flawless robin's egg blue above all others. Miners followed the thin veins into the mountain with nothing but a hammer and an iron chisel, chipping the rock away by hand to lift each nodule out whole. Break it, and it was worthless. Here's the cruel twist. When gunpowder arrived to speed the digging, it shattered the stones inside the rock and collapsed the price. Neyshabur turquoise still sets the world standard for quality, but the men who could read a vein by eye are nearly gone. Number 21. Marrying the date palms by hand. Date palms grow as separate male and female trees, and in the wild, the wind pollinates them. Badly. So oasis farmers took the job themselves, keeping just one male for every 100 females, and pollinating every female flower by hand. The worker tied a woven belt of palm leaflets, the parvand, around the trunk and his own back, then walked up the bare pole. 40 to 60 trees a day, 3 times each season, timed to the exact hour the flowers opened. Sumerian farmers were doing this by 2300 BC. Today, drones are being tested to replace the climbers, because the young men who could scale a palm and read its bloom are vanishing from the oases. Number 20. farming the sky for fertilizer. Isfahan's soil was starved of nitrogen, and there was no fertilizer to buy. So Persian farmers built enormous mud brick towers, some holding 14,000 pigeons each, for one reason only: to harvest the droppings. The birds were never eaten. Their guano fed the melon and cucumber fields the region was famous for, and doubled as an ingredient in gunpowder and in leather tanning. At its height, around the reign of Shah Abbas 4 centuries ago, Isfahan was ringed by some 3,000 of these towers. Chemical fertilizer made them obsolete almost overnight. Only a few hundred crumbling towers remain, and the craft of building and tending them is effectively dead. Number 19. The pre-dawn harvest of red gold. In the deserts of Khorasan grows the crocus that gives the world its most expensive spice. Every autumn, for a window of barely 10 days, the purple flowers open at first light, and they must be picked before the sun climbs and ruins them. It takes over 150,000 flowers to make a single kilogram of saffron. Each flower holds just 3 crimson threads, and every thread is pinched out by hand around a shared pile, the whole family working against the clock. Iran still grows 90% of the planet's saffron, but rising wages and young people leaving the land mean fewer hands each year know how to time the bloom. Number 18. Distilling spring into a bottle. Around the desert town of Kamsar, 1,600 meters up, the damask rose blooms for a few short weeks each May. Pickers are in the fields before dawn because the oil fades once the sun is high. 30 kilograms of petals and 80 liters of water go into a great copper vessel called a deg, sealed and set over a slow, steady fire. Too hot, and the fragrance breaks. The steam is caught, cooled, and condensed drop by drop into rosewater. This is almost exactly the method Avicenna wrote down 1,000 years ago. Iran supplies 90% of the world's rosewater, yet the masters who judge the fire by smell are aging out. Number 17. Weaving a house out of a goat. The black tents of Iran's nomads, the siyah chador, were not bought. They were grown and woven. The women sheared the goats, cleaned and hand-spun the hair into yarn, and wove the roof on a simple loom set up at the back of the tent. Here's the genius most people miss. The walls were made of reeds bound with goat hair, and when it rained, the reeds swelled shut and turned the wall waterproof. When it dried, they shrank and let the desert breeze pass through to cool the family inside. A living, breathing climate system, woven by hand. Settlement has nearly ended the nomadic life, and with it, this weave. Number 16. Knotting a rug from memory on a loom that folds. The Qashqai and their neighbors migrate 500 kilometers twice a year between summer and winter pastures, so their loom had to fold up and travel on a mule. On a simple horizontal frame pegged to the ground, the women tied 90 to 180,000 knots per square meter, in natural dyes made from their own plants, following no written pattern at all. The design lived in the weaver's head, half memory, half improvisation. A real tribal gaba carries a whole world inside it. As the tribes settle into towns, the freehand knot, woven without a chart, is fading into factory copies. Number 15. Crossing a killing desert by camel and cistern. Before highways, trade moved across Iran's deserts on camel caravans that could not afford to misjudge the distance. The answer was a chain of caravanserais, fortified inns spaced roughly a day's march apart, each with its own domed cistern of cool water waiting inside. A caravan master read the dunes, the stars, and the wells, and knew almost to the hour when the next shelter would rise over the horizon. Get it wrong, and the desert took the whole caravan. The roads are asphalt now, and the camels are gone, and the men who could navigate that emptiness from memory went with them. Number 14. The buried cathedral of water. In a land where a single summer could erase every open pool, Persians stored their water underground in a domed reservoir called an ab-anbar. They dug a great cylindrical tank as deep as 10 meters, sealed it with sarouj, and capped it with a brick dome, some holding over 3,000 cubic meters. The largest single-domed example, built in 1812, still stands. Buried and thick-walled, the water stayed cold and clean for months, and wind towers on the roof kept it fresh. Modern piped water made them redundant in a single generation, and the masons who could raise a watertight underground dome by hand are almost all gone. Number 13. Serving frozen dessert in the middle of a desert. Long before freezers, Persians were eating faluda, thin starch noodles in a chilled rose and lime syrup. It is widely considered the oldest frozen dessert on Earth, reaching back roughly 2,500 years. And it was only possible because of the ice the desert made in winter and hoarded through summer, which we'll come back to. Making it took a cook who could pull the starch into fine threads and chill the whole thing without a single machine. It survives today mostly as a tourist curiosity, the hand skill behind the real thing quietly replaced by industrial mixers. Number 12. Timing every drop with a sinking bowl. When a whole village shares one underground stream, who gets the water, and for how long? The Persians solved it with a water clock, the finjan. A small bowl with a tiny hole in its base was floated in a pot of water. It filled and sank in a fixed span of time, and each sinking marked one unit of a farmer's share. A trusted elder, the mirab, ran it day and night, calling out the turns. The clock at Gonabad kept the water fair until 1965, when modern clocks finally replaced it. Its logic goes back 2,500 years, and the office of mirab has all but disappeared. Number 11. Sharing a river that nobody could see. This is less a tool than an invention almost no one credits the Persians for. A body of water law thousands of years old. A new qanat could not be dug too close to an old one, in case it stole its flow. Landowners had to grant it passage, but could not refuse without cause. And the water itself was owned in timed shares, bought, sold, and inherited like land. It was a complete legal code for an invisible resource, enforced by custom and by the mirab, and it let desert villages share scarce water for millennia without collapsing into war. As the qanats fall silent, the unwritten law that governed them is being forgotten. Number 10. Finding water that no one can see. Every qanat began with an almost supernatural act of reading the land. A master water finder walked the foot of the mountains, studying the color of the soil, the plants that grew, the way moisture sat in the ground at dawn, and decided where, far below, an aquifer was hiding. Then he sank a trial shaft, sometimes 100 meters and more, betting weeks of labor on his reed. Get it right, and a village lived. Get it wrong, and the whole dig was wasted. Geologists with instruments now do what these men did by eye. And the last of those who could simply read a hillside for water are nearly gone. Number 9. Cutting a level line through a mountain in the dark. Here is the feat that still stuns engineers. Once the water was found, the tunnel had to fall at barely 1 meter for every 1,000. Gentle enough that the water would not stagnate, but never so steep that it tore the tunnel apart, and hold that grade underground for up to 70 kilometers. The Muqani did it with a string, a simple level, and an oil lamp whose flame told him the air was still safe to breathe. no lasers, no GPS. Because the water ran underground, almost none of it was lost to the sun, where a Roman aqueduct would have evaporated it away. Fewer men can do this every year. Number 8. Digging the tunnel itself. With the line surveyed, the real labor began. Down a shaft barely a meter wide, one digger worked the face with a short pick and a small lamp, filling a leather bucket with spoil. Above him, 2 men turned a wooden windlass, the chark, hauling the earth up one bucket at a time, then dumping it in a ring around the shaft, which is why a qanat looks from the air like a long line of craters. Vertical shafts, sunk every few meters, fed him air and light. A single qanat could take a generation to finish. These were craftsmen who inherited the trade from their fathers, and they are almost the last of their kind. Number 7. Keeping the river alive. A qanat is not built once and forgotten. Every spring, without fail, it had to be crawled end to end and cleaned by hand. Silt scooped out, collapsed roof patched, the flow coaxed back. Miss it, and the tunnel chokes, and the village dies of thirst. For thousands of years there was always a class of men whose whole life was this endless, invisible maintenance, descending again and again into the dark. Iran's own water authority reports that the water drawn through qanats fell by half in just 5 years last decade, as deep wells and neglect took over. The men who kept them breathing are simply not being replaced. Number 6. The deadliest job in the desert. Pattern break. This one killed the men who did it. The muqani, the qanat digger, worked meters underground in a tunnel a meter wide, with water rising around him, almost no air, and tons of unstable earth overhead. Cave-ins were common, floods were common, deaths were common. They were a hereditary caste, the skill passed father to son, and they were paid well precisely because the work could bury them alive. Before every descent, prayers were said over them. A muqani would refuse to go down on a day he felt was unlucky. They kept a civilization alive from inside its own grave. And today, you can barely find one under 75. Number 5. Air conditioning a house with buried water. Now watch how it all connects. In the hottest cities, a home had an underground room, a sardab, with an opening onto the cool, damp air of the qanat tunnel running beneath it. A tower above pulled that qanat-chilled air up through the house, over a fountain, and out again. No electricity, no refrigerant, just moving air, cold water, and clever stone. Families still remember standing under that draft as children, walking in from the furnace outside into a wall of cool. It cooled homes for centuries. Today it's been swapped for humming electric boxes, and the builders who knew how to marry a house to a hidden stream are nearly gone. Number 4. The tower that air-conditioned a whole city. The badger, the wind catcher, is the icon of desert Iran, a tall chimney rising off the roof, open at the top, that scoops any passing breeze and funnels it down into the rooms below while the hot air is pushed out. In the city of Yazd, once dotted with 700 of them, they drop indoor temperatures by 8 to 12 degrees for free. The tallest, at Gonabad, stands nearly 34 meters. Best of all, it works even with no wind, using the difference in temperature to pull the air itself. Engineers designing carbon-free buildings today are openly copying it, while the craftsmen who once built them are dying out. Number 3. Manufacturing ice in the furnace of summer. This is the one that sounds impossible. In a desert that hits 104 degrees, Persians made and stored ice. 2,000 years before the refrigerator. On clear winter nights, they flooded shallow, shaded pools that radiated their heat up into the open sky and froze, even when the air stayed above freezing. Before dawn, workers broke the ice and rushed it into a giant sarouj dome. Walls 2 meters thick, some rising 60 feet. The one in Kerman could hold an estimated 5,000 tons. It kept ice through the whole summer. Scientists now study the Yakhchal for zero-carbon cooling, while the men who could run one by feel are gone. Number 2. The 2,500-year-old Cathedral of Water. At Gonabad stands the masterpiece of the whole tradition, a qanat begun around 500 BC under the Achaemenids. It runs 33 kilometers through the earth. It is fed by 427 wells. At its deepest, the shaft drops 300 meters below the surface. Dug by hand, with lamps and buckets, by people who could not see where they were going. And here is the part that should stop you cold. 2,500 years later, it is still flowing, still delivering water to Gonabad today. UNESCO named it a World Heritage Site in 2016. The knowledge that built it is exactly what we are losing. Number 1. The invisible river that built a civilization. Everything on this list, the ice, the gardens, the cool towers, the cities in the sand, rests on one idea. 3,000 years ago, Persians realized they could reach the water hidden inside the mountains and lead it, underground and by gravity alone, for tens of kilometers out to the empty plains where they wanted to live. No pump, no power, just the pull of the earth and an unimaginable amount of skill. Qanats still supply roughly 15% of all the water in Iran. They turned a desert into an empire. And the last generation of men who know how to build one is passing, one old master at a time. These masters are almost gone. Subscribe now, before the last of this knowledge disappears for good.